Good afternoon. You can hear me okay? Welcome. I'm Meg Weston, and along with Mark Burrows, we're co-founders, co-directors of this Camden Festival of Poetry. And we want to welcome you to the very first of an annual event that we plan to have in the town of Camden. And it's so good to see everybody who came out here. And I think this area is just like that. So I was thinking, as I was thinking about today, about a day recently, an evening, that we'd gone to dinner with some friends. And I was sitting in this rather noisy restaurant next to a guy that I know and some other people. And I said, I confessed that I had gone out that afternoon and I had spent more than $100 on poetry books. And he kind of looked at me strangely, a little puzzled. I said, "You look puzzled, Jeff." And he said, "Well, Meg, I just didn't know you were that interested in chickens." Well, you may not have known that this many people in Camden were that interested in poetry. But Maine is kind of like that. You might be interested in chickens, you might be interested in poetry, or probably both, you know. So, and you might not have known that some of the Mid-Coast poets or musicians that you're going to hear today. But if you didn't, you're in for a treat. And if you did, that may be why you're here. And of course, I know you're all here to hear Richard Blanco as our keynote later this afternoon. We're excited about that. I want to start by extending my thanks to the Festival Planning Committee, who have been working tirelessly for about 6 months to bring this all together. 7 other poets organizing this, who worked with Mark and myself, and that would be John Paul Caponegro, Dave Morrison, Ellen Goldsmith, Margaret Haberman, Audrey Lay, Maya Stein, and Sandy Wiseman. And if you guys want to just stand up so we can give you an applause. Some of them are reading today, some are not, but all of them were deeply involved in making this happen. And I want to thank you to our American Sign Language interpreters here today who are volunteering their time to help us out, Margaret Haberman, Anna Perna, and Summit Coleman. So thank you. And Mark, do you want to take over from here?
Thank you. Let me add my warm welcome to all of you. And you're all old enough, almost all of you are old enough to remember the movie Field of Dreams, If You Build It, They Will Come. And I know well enough from planning many events that if you plan it, they won't necessarily come. So we're so glad that you saw the movie and heard that in your mind and thought, they planned this, we got to come. It'll be a feast today, all afternoon, starting with a round of poetry and song making, workshops in the middle of the afternoon, a break to meet poets at the tables, poets who've published poetry and are sharing it with us today, and then at 10 to 4, come back for more music and for the presentation of the first Zimprich Poet of Promise Award, which is being received by one of our own Camden High School students later this afternoon. And then, of course, Richard Blanco's talk at around 4 o'clock. So my thanks to all of you for coming, for making this journey, for believing that poetry matters enough to change our lives and to change our community's life. And with that conviction, I should add a note of thanks to this church for really donating this space for us to be here today. So let's thank this congregation. So enjoy this day in any way that feels right to you. If you need something, ask Meg or me or people who look like they know what's going on around here. There will be a few of us. There will be a mid-afternoon break and a reception at 5 o'clock to toast Richard and to toast those poets, writers who've made this such a special day. Oh, and lest I not forget this, the raffle. If you got a raffle ticket and you gave it in, you'll want to stay for the 5 o'clock raffle because you might win a trip for 2 to Hawaii, which we're not offering this year, but you might have won it if we had offered it. But there will be other things. A warm welcome to all of you.
All right, we want to introduce the poets that are reading, but before that, I don't know if Mark said this, but I want to thank the many, many sponsors who helped us, donated to make this a free event and bring it. So there are all kinds of businesses listed in your program and individuals and community partners and media sponsors who helped make this possible. So with that, we'll get on to our poets this afternoon, and we're going to start with Maya Stein.
Thank you. I'm so excited to see so many people here. It's really incredible, and I want to just really send a big thank you to Mark and Meg for being such an amazing band of a duo of leaders for this committee. It's been a pleasure to be on it, and I'm happy that we get to have this day today. I think one of the hardest questions that I have been asked as a writer of poetry is what kind of poems do you write? I'm really stumped by that question. It feels different than saying what kind of vegetables are you growing in your garden, or what kind of dress are you going to wear for the wedding, or what kind of dental work are you getting done later this week? For me, the question is about why do I write poetry? Why do I turn to poetry? What do I look for in poetry? And how does poetry help me make sense of the world? And that really is not a question, it's an answer. Poetry helps me make sense of the world. It helps me identify the world, the tiny matters of the world, to quote Sandra Cisneros. She wrote, "The world is made of tiny matters." And it's tiny matters, and tiny matters matter. And so poetry helps point my attention to tiny matters. I keep a weekly poetry practice called 10-Line Tuesday. I've been doing this for about 18 years. I write a 10-line poem every Tuesday. It's called 10-Line Tuesday. And it helps point my attention to tiny matters every week, 10 lines at a time. This is a poem called Little Worlds. In her kitchen, Gloria pours us each a cup of coffee, asks if I want anything in mine, cream, sugar, the usual. I resist the urge to pretend I'm reuniting with my grandmother. In the same way, I tell myself the hummingbird sipping at the feeder is probably not my father. And the 6-year-old riding her new bicycle isn't the child I never got around to having. But what can I say? I want to spackle each absence with its opposite, the vivid buzz of French roast, a frenetic dance above a dish of syrupy water, maternal glee at the young girl's courage. It is too hard to imagine what's gone being gone forever. So what if the little worlds I pretend into being won't last either? The coffee running cold, the bird abandoning the scene for Mexico come winter, the child growing out of her shoes. I wrap my hands around the mug until they touch. I watch the sky for the sound of wings. I think one of the myths of poetry is that it's writing in general, but perhaps especially poetry, is that it's an act you do in solitude. Another practice of mine is to create collaborative poetry, and I offer up these what I call collaborative poetry throwdowns on Facebook, and I offer up a prompt to get people to share a line, and my job as the poet is to stitch them together. It's really an act of assembly. So I'll share a collaborative poem. The prompt I offered up was a line of poetry I'd written. The line was, "Each morning something extraordinary is happening at the roots of all our lives." Each morning something extraordinary is happening at the roots of all our lives. And I invited people to write one line about something extraordinary that was happening in their lives that maybe no one was seeing. So this is a collaborative poem. I did not write any of these lines, but I put them together, and hopefully it makes some sense. About 50 participants shared their lines. This poem is called "When We Were Owls." Someone is always saying change is coming. What are we to do about it? We keep grabbing at sand, trying to hold on as the wind twirls around us. And yet I want to believe love will always heal our broken world, that it is possible to imagine a garden in the middle of summer, or think about flying gracefully while standing on one leg and brushing your teeth. I want to believe inside of us is a clearing where we can drink in the stillness and hear only rhythms, tiny seeds making their microscopic blueprint toward a bursting triumph, one breath at a time. This is my understanding of a higher power. This is the way we can drop into our bodies and receive the morning as it is a miracle. But how do we open our senses and enter the shared air, the heart, the soul of all living things? How do we learn to trust what has been searching for us? How can we believe that even a sliver of shrapnel threatens, even if a sliver of shrapnel threatens it, joy can be effortless? The roots have always held us. It may take 3 years before we'll take the next important first steps towards something, only now just standing on its edge. Maybe we'll have 8 more decades on the planet to hold the answers we're asking for. Maybe a chapter we'd been avoiding for months will fall out of the sky like manna, and we will know that each moment in time, however brief, offers a chance to change direction. That we can walk unseen along the path and rest in the way things are. And that what was hemmed in by packed boxes has the promise of a future, and we can stand in it with our feet fully planted, glad to love the earth for one more day. We can discover again how memory can become action, and in turn purpose. We can hold on to true north because it's happening in so many ways. Right now, for example, 3 publishers are reading a manuscript where black ink had glistened once. Just when someone had thought they had reached a state of invisibility, they have been seen and are preening their feathers, rising from the ashes, preparing to ignite. Almost done. There is a soft and buttery smoothness inside when we say yes. When we make a space, when despite our questioning, we begin to take in a bit more, to floss regularly, to forgive. Maybe we are learning how to pray, how to listen to our own blue flame voice. Let's picture with our eyes closed the soft feathered bodies of owls, heads swiveling side to side. It's a shift of heart we need as much as place. Neurons in our brains are firing now into new chords of hope. I wonder, have we ever listened like this to the rain? Thank you. I've got, maybe I don't have, and one more short 10-line poem. As I said, poetry helps me identify the world and understand the world, but it also helps me imagine what's next. This is called The Poems I Still Want to Write. The poems I still want to write have streetlights in them and spring peepers and the word scintilla and also smattering and sprinkle. In the poems I still want to write, scars are worn like medals. Their stitch lines a good luck charm, a treasure map, an augury. The poems I still want to write have honey-stuck jar lids and crystals of salt on their lips, and inside some punch-drunk insect swims ambiguous, delirious laps. In the poems I still want to write, my father reappears at the piano and my mother on a horse and my siblings in a field of midsummer strawberries, and we are all 12 again. The poems I want to write are farmhouse windows, winter frosted, and dirt roads during mud season, and the smell of greenhouses, and the feeling of watching someone on skis for the first time, that mountain loud joy of falling down and getting back up again. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Maya. Our next poet is Jason Whitney.
I'd like to thank everybody for being here today, and also for Mark and Meg and the committee to put this together for the first ever Camden Poetry Festival. It's a special blessing today, and realizing that I was born in this town, and it's just kind of nice to be back, that's for sure. As Maya said, I write because I have to. I write in ways that celebrate nature, in ways that talk about the sort of linguistics of stones and trees and birds. And I fasted from my 20s until my mid-50s in the First Nations way. There's many things that happen out there. First of all, on those first couple days, you realize that some of the dross that we carry drops. And as the days go on and you're fasting away from people and away from things, you start to hear and listen and hear the language of all our brothers and sisters around us. So it's out of that space that my first poem I'd like to read. It's from a roughly titled series called the Katahdin series, which will be due out next year. And it has a poem followed by a meditation too. Stone linguistics. Trees speak fluently in wind. Stones speak fluently in mineral. Both know language beyond language, so converse with all in their languages. Can we say the same? Spend time with a silent heart and mind, away from mechanized noise. Doing so, your linguistic ability may one day match that of tree people. maybe in several lives, match that of stone people. No, stone people and tree people have no words for lies, deceit, stigmatization, marginalization, racism, sexism, hatred, or any word that separates any being from the web of being. We make designations and categorize all reality to what fits in the way our species thinks. Perhaps we've been climbing a ladder, and one day we'll look over our shoulders to see we're on the wrong wall, as Campbell said. Lose, find yourself in the wind. Lose, find yourself in the stars at night. Lose, find yourself in the language all around you. One day, perhaps, you will be well on the way to match the wisdom of tree people and preparing yourself further to match that of stone people. This next poem from the series talks a lot about the child within all of us. And Taoist culture, it's perceived that once somebody turns 9 years old, the third eye starts to close. And a lot of that has to do with culture and kind of the rules and things of established society. As a matter of fact, one master said, all the practices we do, meditation, the Qigongs, the Tai Chi, all the things we do are simply to open that third eye again. So I invite us all to do that in all the ways that we do. I pray for fallen trees. In the community of trees, my breath and heart slow. I wonder if I can lift my legs, wooden in admiration. Are roots growing from my toes and bubbling well points? Am I a spiritual weather vane like these brothers and sisters are? I pray for fallen trees. I am mortified when I hear a chainsaw. Once as a child, I put my hands on a giant sequoia and fell into a dream. In the complete silence of the forest, squirrel, owl, ant, beetle, various birds. I was born, lived, and died with this tree as home. When our family left, I didn't talk for 2 days. Silence commands attention. Communication commands reciprocity. I was talking to the sacred one with my slow breath and heart. There are many benefits that scientists have determined occur from forest bathing, Shinrin Yoku. There is such a rich offering of phytochemicals from trees that in Japan they use forest bathing as a tool for recovery. It is a form of ecotherapy. This is wonderful, and I love this research as it shows the interconnection of all beings. I like to think of this exchange as spiritual as well. Standing meditation Qigong is predicated on the close relationships humans have with trees. In this exercise, we root our feet to the ground and let go of tension to be like a tree. Classes I have taken out into the forest have inevitably had individuals start seeing faces in trees. I encouraged all to find time in the forest, to feel the connection, to communicate with them as they do with each other. They love you as all in the cosmos does. Find reverence and be like a tree, not taking but giving. And I'm just wondering in this last moment if we can just kind of listen a little bit. Maybe listen to our heart. Maybe listen to the body, spirit, mind of our neighbor. Maybe listen to the way the wind is singing the trees, the traffic. Wili wan paside elga monkek toho.
Thank you, Jason. Our next poet is Ellen Goldsmith.
I'm so honored to be here, and thank you, Maya and Jason. Can everyone hear me? Thank you, Maya and Jason, for taking me to all those wonderful places. The first poem that I'm going to read is the last poem in my recent book, Left Foot, Right Foot. And this book is a narrative of an illness and recovery experience in 28 poems. At some point in my recovery, the phrase, "I no longer have a favorite color," started roaming around my mind, inhabiting my brain. And I thought, oh, this is a good title for a poem. I no longer have a favorite color. In illness, distinctions dissolve. It's simply color or no color, heartbeat or no heartbeat. As night approaches, I welcome each shade of blue, from robin's egg to indigo. And waking to a modest sunrise, I recall the extravagance of yesterdays, both a promise of the coming day. Almost dying removes preferences. What's better about grass than a layer of fallen leaves? Many poems speak to other poems and other poets, stand on the shoulders of those who came before, so to speak, or those who are here now. This poem explicitly engages with a particular poem, Ars Poetica, by a great poet, Miloš. In the poem, I use some phrases from that poem. I highly recommend reading and rereading Miloš's Ars Poetica. In conversation with Miloš's Ars Poetica, poetry, you say, is a reminder of how hard it is to remain only one person. When I was a different person, the sick me, was that a narrowing of self or someone else entirely? The door to my hospital room was always open, and I beckoned to whoever walked by, doctor and patient alike. No one ever entered. A swirl of selves. The getting sick me, surprised at how hard it was to unload the dishwasher. The me in the doctor's office or in the CT scanner, failing every test. The empty riverbed me, accepting whatever came. And then the coming into spring me, thrilled by the smallest gain, being able to go up and down 3 steps. As I look at the world outside my window, the words recovery and healing come forward like your invisible guests. The wind moves everything, thin branches of the birch, the needle-laden boughs of the white pine. Like you, I aspire to a more spacious form. Perhaps a leafless tree revealing a starry sky. Perhaps an evergreen, steady with holding on. The last poem is an example of a poem where the title goes right into the poem. A Day Will Come. That's the title. So now I'm going to do the poem. A day will come when the heirloom watch is beyond repair, when the rare illness can't be cured, when the confidence in a better tomorrow dies. But today, snow on the field brightens the browns and grays and dark greens, and the daffodils my husband brought home yesterday say love. And I feel the patience of bulbs that will push through the damp and dark to greet spring. And I hold, not tight, but gently, these words, a day will come.
It may well be that the first poets were singers, or the first singers were poets. And when we thought about shaping this festival, we were sure from the outset that we needed to have someone to sing poems to us. And so please join me in welcoming John and Rachel Nicholas.
First thing I want to say is I'm not trying to be cool by wearing sunglasses. I have a broken blood vessel in my eye and it's kind of gross, so. This song is called End of the Day, and it's just simply a simple song with a lot of chords about trying to find contentment in a flawed world. And we welcome Mona Lisa to help us tell the story.
Makes her look so sublime. The band is all here, but the choir's running late. Something's out of tune, but the spirit is great. The Mona Lisa smiles like there's no other way. that's what you got at the end of the day. You just wanna know why she's never down, no matter what happens all around. You would love to be that way at the end of the day. You would love to be that way at the end of the day.
Margaret Haberman.
Okay, I feel a little like Clark Kent. I don't usually go from interpreting to participating, so I brought my outfit so you wouldn't get confused. Can you hear me all right? Okay. This first poem, it's a bit of a ride. It's called 3 Good Things. I wrote it in the fall of 2020, which I don't know if you're like me, but sometimes when I think about that time, it feels bizarre. The things that I did, the things I was grasping for. And one of the things that I did was to download this app called 3 Good Things, which I used for, I don't know, maybe a day. And you were supposed to put 3 good things down every day. And I think I did it for a day. But I wrote a poem. And it's called 3 Good Things. Ready? 3 good things. Maybe it's 4. We can always add on at the end if necessary. There's a crow on the telephone line calling 2 syllables. It could be a raven. She is telling me something. The blueberry barrens are burning scarlet, orange, maroon, their low carpet of stems and leaves crunching. I apologize to them and the farmer as I look for rocks to step from step to step and hold my weight. Sitting down on a boulder, the road far below, I can pretend to blend in with the world. The sliver of lake beyond the forest, that water, I know it. For now, I am sitting, keeping count. I think that is 3. In late September, paddling along the shore of Kineo, a kingfisher kept time and company. Swoop, beat, beat, repeat, branch to branch. I said, don't leave us. At Hardscrabble Point, the wind came out of the north, turning the lake into white surf, temperature falling. We pulled on hats, sweaters, built up the fire again. In the morning, the wind lay down to rest. We pushed boats into water, took the protected way home. Grateful for how the sun in late fall can fool you into believing all will be well, that winter might not come. Before the drive home, we ordered food hot off the grill and stopped in Monson, facing south. Unwrapping tinfoil, sandwiches still warm, cheddar and tomatoes on fresh bread, better than good. There's more. I'm on a roll here, driving west toward the presidentials, stuck behind a truck, pulling a horse trailer, miles twisting, unrelenting. When they turn right instead of going straight, that's another good thing. Best of all is the slate blue pumpkin sitting quietly in the back seat. Squat, heft of ethereal roundness, gleaming, regal, no pedestrian orange for this one. I am bringing it to my mother, along with 7 eggs and a bundle of calendula, because I cannot bring her sister back, because I cannot bring my father back, because I cannot make the pandemic end in her lifetime, because I cannot take her one last time to France, to Angkor Wat, to Bisbee, Arizona. I am bringing her a slate blue pumpkin, which, if you look closely enough, holds 3 good things and all the hope I can muster. In any poetry workshop I've ever taken, I'm sorry, I hope you could hear me, I was straying. Any poetry workshop I think I've ever taken, when the prompt is to write something short, I'm challenged, but I did write something short. And one of the other things that I do as a writer is I listen to things. People will say random things, and I'll just write them down, and then it'll turn into a poem at some point, or it'll have a little piece of a poem at some point. And this is from something a wonderful performer and writer, Gretchen Berg, said in one of a workshop that we took together. It's called "We Were Talking About Angels." We were talking about angels, and Gretchen said, "They're always just showing up." Back when I believed in the power of animals to tell me what I needed to know, like whether or not to leave my husband and move to a different city, I would see a fox run across the field, or if it was young, stand a moment too long with its tail parallel to the sky, or a great blue heron. I was always seeing them, not because they were messengers coming to save me with their wisdom and kindness, but because I lived in a place side by side with herons. Still, I would open the book a friend gave me on animal medicine and try to find the reason my life felt like clay and granite, not like the fox bounding into the woods, and not like the great bird who might for a moment look awkward, even ugly, stepping through the muck of low tide, but then open its wings, tuck in gangly legs, and keep rising toward a place of protection and clarity, to the place where the angels might be waiting. Thank you so much.
John Paul Caponegro.
It's great to see so many familiar faces today. I've just returned from my 13th voyage to Antarctica. Going was a dream come true. This trip was also a dream come true. We got to share it with my wife. I was hoping a few other locals who would join us also were here, because they know now the extraordinary character of the place. It's a profoundly mysterious place of extremes and contradictions. The highest, driest, coldest, windiest, most remote continent is a frozen desert, but also the largest body of fresh water on the planet and contains 90% of the world's ice. The largest animal on land is a tardigrade. You need a microscope to see it. Okay. One of the things I love most about Antarctica is that it touches us all. It changes climate. And so while it seems like another planet, it's Earth. And while it seems very far away, it touches us all. And of course, there's a growing concern about the climate crisis. And that's what this first piece is coming out of. And a nod to, I'm so glad that Clark Kent was here today, because this is called Superman Has a Fortress of Solitude in Antarctica. Satellite images suggest monuments and more mysteries buried in faraway Antarctica. If this is neither pareidolia nor paranoia, but true, let it be aliens, please. Let it be a temple, blue-green glowing halls carved with ancient hieroglyphs, containing scriptures with wisdom to undo our undoings. Please. Let it be technology for us to become electronically enhanced, cybernetically connected, to stabilize our instabilities. Please. Let it be AI, calculating futures for us faster than we can imagine, Rubik's Cube, all possible combinations before we commit ourselves to an inevitable evolution. Be inevitable, please. Let it be a genetic code we need to uncoil our lizard brains, no more amygdala in a maze, but a neocortex without limits of skullcap, no more fight or flight. Could we grow wings, please? Let it be proof we are not alone, not fully of this world, that there is another home waiting for us when we're done with this one and another. Flower, forest, ocean, desert, ice. We'll take anything and everything if it hasn't been ruined. Please. Sifting deepfake nothings, I scan the web, looking for confirmation that we are not alone, hoping something's out there that can save us from ourselves. So far, all I've found is solitude. Strangely, gazing back at Earth, it's a relief. Let us be enough, please. After returning from a previous voyage, my father asked me, "Why do you keep returning?" Too many reasons came all at once, and none of them seemed adequate enough to describe the mystery that has possessed me. I feel like I left a piece of myself in Antarctica, and I don't want it back. I go because every time she leaves so much more in me. Maine photographer Elliot Porter's contagious enthusiasm for Antarctica and my mother's designing and producing his book were pivotal in planting the seeds for my dream of visiting it. Dreams do come true. I never dreamed that I would return so many times, nor that I'd get to read this poem to Stephen Porter, Elliot's son. So thank you for coming. This one's called Talking with Elliot Porter. I'm surprised to find your book, Antarctica, in the stern, where the library rests, next to Shackleton's. It's time for one more conversation. Remember after your heart surgery when I said, your generation is extraordinary to have seen so much change in a single lifetime. 2 world wars, personal computers, genetic engineering, men on the moon. You smiled at me and said, you'll see more. There was the moment when, after discussing the great issues of our times, desertification, they call it climate change now, and overpopulation. We've doubled our numbers since then, and we'll do it again in my child's lifetime. You predicted your generation would be the one that determines whether we pass on a habitable environment for the future or not. How are we doing now? Generations hope for the next and another. So we come and go. But let's talk about this place, Antarctica, the bottom of the world, the remotest, highest, driest, windiest desert with the whitest whites and the bluest blues, its core of silence encircled by rings of aquatic life. Many times you showed me your photographs, becoming uncharacteristically at a loss for words and even breath. Because you were so articulate, I didn't understand. Now, as I turn through your pages, looking at you, no longer looking at me, I find myself in that same state. My words keep flowing uncontrollably in fits, interrupted by echoing silences before swelling again in waves of sound, anticipating another loss. You tried, but ultimately couldn't tell me how beautiful this end of the world is. And now I know how that feels. How lucky to be here, however briefly. We all hope for more, Life is exquisitely brief, living through others. Thank you for sharing breath with us today.
Lucinda.
Bring this down. I'm going to read you two poems. The first one is from a series of writings that I'm doing, going from room to room in the house of my childhood. The house had many rooms, which did make it hard for me to find my family. Daddy's walk-in closet. No one knows I'm here. It's dark. Smell of camphor and cologne inside a moth ballroom. Pushing up on tiptoes, sweeping the air, I feel a string to pull a light on. There's a dead mole lying in Daddy's shoes. It's the electric shoe shiner. I press my heel down on a cold silver button. Suddenly, it spins into a hot fur tornado, tickling my foot. I swim in Daddy's dancing shoes across the hall, plunging my face into a cool waterfall of ties. Wrapping my arms around silk, stripes, polka dots, tigers. A lone pine tree. That's from the Pine Valley Golf Club, a place Daddy drives away to. His jackets hang in the top bar above me. Sleeves of tweed, linen, pinstripe. The black tuxedo brushes my head. My girl. I want them to reach down and pick me up. He was 50 when I was born. Where had all his clothes gone before me? Daddy comes to dinner in the tweed jacket. He's been in the library with a whiskey. Daddy's quiet when he's angry, until a lightning flash. I don't know how to stop. On a low shelf, a pile of sweaters. There's a tiny hole. My pinky fits through into the soft gray arm. I thought mothballs could keep holes out. Okay, this next poem is about a time and a place when I was in my 20s and I lived up in the mountains above Boulder, Colorado. She's gone. The fire in 4 Mile Canyon scored the hillsides. The then torrential rain for 8 days. The mountain fell down around her ankles. She's gone. Salina Junction swiped clean. Our cabin on the creek swept away, splinters of her floating in Boulder Creek. Everyone wanted to live up there back then in the mountains above Boulder, Gold Hills, the diamond in the crown. A mining town of professors, hippies, and rednecks perched 8,455 feet up in the Rockies. The dogs walk the kids to school. Stephen Stills plays guitar for us. Bucky Fuller plants geodesic domes on the edge of town. She wasn't much to look at, our cabin. A dusty green asphalt shack. You hold your foot in the screen door to stop the slam. Inside, a temple of sound. Our bedroom's a music box whose lid never shuts, with windows hinged open to the creek. My boyfriend Wick panels our bedroom in barnboards with shelves for our books and LPs. Bob Dylan's Nashville skyline plays Lay, Lady, Lay, lay across my big brass bed. I string colored beads on threads with crystal prisms that dangle from their ends. Macrame hung philodendrons thrive in the canyon's low light, as do I. The Vietnam War is raging. We believe we can change the world. I tack a white piano shawl embroidered in pink roses to the ceiling. It pillows over us. The breeze stirs the fringe. The creek rushes through me. Wick's body pulls me to planets beyond my solar system. After years of being told not to have desire, I want it all now. Charismatic and mercurial, his humor breaks me in half. Eyes the color of forget-me-nots, blue with a dot of yellow sorrow at the center. I think our love can stop a war. That was before he found cocaine. Each morning, he's circumnavigated again in a country with no name. I can't reach him. By winter, ice, and the snow was up his nose. He wants other lovers. The geese migrate without me. I don't hear them call as they fly overhead. I lay alone on the bathroom floor that night, miscarrying blood and the baby. I left the junction before winter could, never got to sit naked in the creek in the heat of summer again. Never will. She's gone. Thank you. Thank you so much for being here.
John and Rachel.
It's so wonderful to see such beautiful faces out there.
Word lovers. We just recently lost a friend. I'm only telling you that because it has to do with the song. And at the time, I had just finished reading Daniel Quinn's Ishmael, and for the second time. And Mary Oliver's poem, The Messenger, had crossed my path, and the first line of the poem, if I'm not mistaken, is, "My work is to love the world." And those three elements came together in the writing of this song. And it's called For Those Who Love the World as Theirs.
We came alone to this green blue place, and now we're here together. We searched the world, we searched our hearts to find our birds of a feather. We've been handed down what came before, and some have tried to do better. We came, we saw, we took and we gave. Still no one leaves here a debtor. Paper yellows flowers dry. You say hello, then goodbye. Some say they live with no regrets, but poets and saints are wise. They dance like fools, they crash their hearts, they sing and they close their eyes. Paper yellows and flowers dry. You say hello, then goodbye. The sun comes up, the days unfold, each with a promise to keep. A sky with clouds, a flock of birds, a tree with roots that run deep. So stay a while and fill your cup and draw deep from the well. For those who love the world as theirs may have the words to tell. Paper yellows and flowers dry. You say hello, then goodbye. Paper yellows and flowers dry. You say hello, and then goodbye.
Thank you to these songwriters, to these poets. Okay. We have a brief break, and let's thank them all again, all of them. If you'd stand up again. Oh, what a wonderful beginning. And this is only beginning. We have workshops now, mini workshops. They're short, they're sweet, they'll take you to amazing places. One of them, the largest, because it's in this space, is by another singer-songwriter, Judd Caswell. So if you signed up for Judd, you just stay right here. If you signed up for other workshops on your way through, you'll find 4 of them in the basement. So they're the easiest way is to go through these doors, straight downstairs. You'll end up in the basement, and you'll find your way around. John Paul Caponegro will be in the Scout room. That's a room with about 30 chairs. And look for Maya will be downstairs, and Ellen will be downstairs. They'll be at their smaller rooms. And Meg Weston will be on this floor all the way through. Just keep going toward the bathrooms and turn right. And there's a little conference room. And Sandy will be in the walkthrough room where you signed up for the workshops. Now, if all that's clear, I'll take a test to see how much you remember. Just find your way around, find a room that looks interesting where there's a chair to sit, and have a great workshop. We'll have a break at 3:15 for coffee from Zoot and all kinds of goodies from Bleecker and Greer and where else? Atlantic Bakery. And then the final session will be back here at 3:45. Have fun. Welcome back, everyone. Welcome back. What a good buzz in the air. What a good thing that art brings us together. In the midst of all that separates and divides, art is a great unifier. We're going to begin this last session of the festival, Camden Festival of Poetry, again with music. Some of you were here for the workshop with Judd Caswell. He doesn't need an introduction to you. For others of you in the program, you'll see a short bio for each of the musicians and poets. So join me in welcoming Judd Caswell.
Like that, there's just no way that I don't stand behind that door while I'm being introduced. You just got, come on, you've got to do it. Thank you so much. What a wonderful time this has been. Guys, I think we could probably do a little less volume on the mics here. I've moved these around so many times, I'm making life very difficult. I think it was Maya who said something about next poem needing to have peepers in it. Is that true? Yeah. So I had to sing this song. This is one of mine. This is a song about my backyard, and it has peepers in it.
Phoebe on a fence post, fly away, fly away. Phoebe on a fence post, fly away home. Green snake in the sweet grass, slide away, slide away. Green snake in the sweet grass, slide away home. 'Cause the sunset through the birches paints a picture on the wall. The dandelions are closing and the hermit thrush calls. So Phoebe on a fence post, fly away, fly away. Phoebe on a fence post, fly away home. Baby in the bathtub, splash away, splash away. Baby in the bathtub, splash the whole floor. And mama in the kitchen, sing away, sing away. Mama in the kitchen, won't you sing a little more? 'Cause there's moonlight on the window and the chicken's home to roost. And this train is bound for bedtime, so shake that red caboose. And baby in the bathtub, splash away. And mama in the kitchen, won't you sing a little more? Brown bat in the starlight, sweep away, swoop away. Brown bat in the starlight, dancing on a breeze. And there's peepers in the frog pond, and they peep away, they squeak away. Peepers in a frog pond are singing through the trees. And there's a barred owl in an oak tree, like the ghost of Robert Frost. He's asking about the yellow wood, the two roads, and the cost. While the peepers in the frog pond
peep away, squeak away in a brown bat, and the starlight is dancing on a breeze. Phoebe on a fence post, fly away, fly away. Phoebe on a fence post, fly away home. That is the first time anybody has ever chuckled about that Robert Frost line. I thank you so much. I thought of that as it was coming up. I was like, they might get it. They might actually know. So thank you very much for that. I'll play. I was born in Belfast, which comes in handy. I play a lot of Irish pubs, and sometimes people ask me if I'm Irish, and I just get to tell them I was born in Belfast. And I just leave it at that. So, but being here this time of year, especially with this wall of lilac out behind, is just like, it just reminds me of home. So I was born in Belfast. I grew up in Morrill. There's a little family farm there where my great-grandfather he called it Alderdown. There was a constant struggle to keep the alders out of the pastures. But I sort of realized a few years ago that going to the Farnsworth Museum and seeing some of Wyeth's, especially the sketches, there's something about the attention to detail in those and the focus that speaks to my memory and sense of home, and the shingles on the side of a barn and just the shape of a tree against the horizon. That just, I don't know, it means a lot to me. So I wanted to try to put a little bit of that in song. Watercolors under glass, pencil sketches framed in brass, windows on a weathered past gone by, the ragged pine on the hungry hill, the beaten farmhouse standing still, and clouds that drift like coffee spilled on the sky. In this still life, time rushes in until life stills again. The iron stove by the wooden door, well, it takes up half the kitchen floor. It buckles down a little more every year. And there's Christina on her chair, sunlight burning in her hair, and all the weight she has to bear is so clear. In this still life, time rushes in until life stills again. Lesson in the artist's hand is plant your feet down where they stand. Love the people, love the land and take the time to contemplate the dark and light that give us shape and soul and sight. And if you're careful, you just might come to find a still life where time rushes in until life stills again.
Judd, Belfast can be very proud of its native son. And if you like this Belfast, the other one has a native son who's coming next year on May 18th, Pádraig Ó Tuama, the Irish poet, peace activist, and remarkably inspiring presence. This festival always had the next generation of poets in mind from the very beginning. Because poetry is not something that old people do, or even middle-aged people do only. It's something that young people do instinctively, almost naturally, until we teach them or life teaches them not to be poets. And we launched this award through the generosity of the Zimprich family, who lost a son who was a poet, tragically. And that family has made it a commitment to inspire the next generation of young poets through projects all across the state of Maine, including now this festival. And so we are grateful to the memory of Gabe Zimprich and to the Zimprich family for generously endowing this award. And it's my great honor to introduce this year's recipient. Anna Piccone comes from the Watershed School, which is literally 100 yards from here. And of all the poets who submitted, and we had a remarkably wonderful collection of poets submitting, we selected Anna's poem, and Anna as the first Zimprich Poet of Promise. To give this award, we're asking Richard Blanco, who also began as a young poet, to congratulate you. And we welcome you to be congratulated by Richard and by Meg and me, and then to read your winning poem and to say a few words about yourself and about the poem. Would you come forward, Anna?
And the Poetry Committee for choosing me to be the winner. Is it on? Hello? Hello? Okay, perfect. And thank you to all of you guys for coming to listen to me. This poem is very special to me. I wrote it when I was in a place when I wasn't really sure about myself as a writer, and a friend really pushed me to keep going. And so I wrote this poem. And the poem is called Dance Naked. Oh, how you light up the room with your wild and untamed moves. You are a force of nature, a true work of art. With every step and every spin, you let go of all inhibitions. You let your true self shine through, and it's a sight to behold. So dance naked, my dear. Let the music take control. Let the rhythm guide your feet, and let your heart be whole. For in this moment of pure joy, there is nothing to hide. You are free to be yourself, so take pride. So dance naked, dance wild, and let the world see you shine. For you are a masterpiece, and you are truly divine. Thank you.
Anna, that was wonderful, and I'm sure we'll all be hearing more from you. Thank you. So I pulled out the wrong piece of paper here. So I'm going to wing it here. It's my job to introduce Richard Blanco. So he doesn't need an introduction to most of you, most of us. And you have all of his awards and publications in your program. So I'm going to let you read that. I'm just going to tell you a few things that maybe you didn't know. Maybe you were like me in 2016, that you didn't know that there were any Cuban Americans living in Bethel, Maine. Never mind a poet that was talented enough and known enough to be chosen by President Obama as the 5th inaugural poet for the United States. Following in the footsteps of such greats as Robert Frost and Maya Angelou and others. So we're all proud to claim Richard as a maniac. And maybe you knew that Richard read a poem at Governor Mills' inauguration earlier this year. But maybe you didn't know that 2 weeks before the election, Governor Mills was the officiant at Richard's marriage to Mark Naveau, his partner of over 20 years. And despite being a little nervous about the polls, she played spoons before Richard and Mark walked through the beautiful pine trees on their property in Bethel and had a ceremony just full of poetry and promise that was really beautiful. So maybe you knew that Richard was named the first and is still the education ambassador for the Academy of American Poets. But unless you've taken a workshop with Richard, as I have, you don't know what a great teacher he is and how much fun he is to learn poetry. And you may not have an experience like I have when he held up my poem in the very first workshop I took with him and said, "This is a mess." And you just had to laugh because you were having so much fun. And that's what I know about Richard. He's fun, he's talented, he's generous, and we're lucky to have him here today as our keynote speaker. So please join me in a warm welcome for Richard Blanco.
Oh, wow. It's crazy. Thank you, Meg. I couldn't have said it better myself. No, you're making me think. I mean, it's just so many wonderful things that I was thinking about saying today as a precursor for the evening. I came to the afternoon readings, and I was just like so overwhelmed, thinking it's been just about over 10 years since we started all making memories here in Camden and Rockport. And some of my that signed up for the first poetry workshops were some of our readers today, and their work has just just blossomed. It's amazing. And thinking about how many wonderful, beautiful, meaningful memories I've had in this place. So I'm verklempt. So that's me. I was like crying like a little baby back there. So I just want to say thank you to all of you for embracing me, for making me familia. And here we are. And that's what even makes this moment even more special, to be part of this inaugural Camden Poetry Festival, which hopefully, not hopefully, will go on, especially with our next keynote, which is an amazing poet. So thank you all for being here. I guess maybe officially I'm not from away anymore. I'm not sure yet, but we'll see. So that being said, I also was thinking about how, I think it was Maya that said that poetry writing is a very solitary endeavor, right? But yet, ironically, right, poetry's DNA is it's all in the oral tradition. It's all in community. It's thousands of years of people sitting around the proverbial campfire, and with song, with prayer, with music, with whatnot. And thank you to Meg and Mark and all the sponsors and all of you here today for making poetry come alive. I always say my poem isn't done until this happens, until there is a sort of a connection, a reciprocal. Never mind, I can't say that word, but it's reciprocal, right? So I think that's just wonderful what's being started here, and again, so proud to be part of this first festival. What else do I got in here? So I wanted to share something. This is going to be a little bit of Richard Unplugged, okay? Because I have done a lot of readings in Maine, and especially in Camden, Rockport, and whatnot, Midcoast. So I thought I'd do something fun and sort of just share some adages about poetry, also some of my favorite poems by other poets, some of my older poems, which hopefully are also goldies, and one new poem from the new book that's coming out at the very end. So that's a special treat my special gift to you for being that family with me. But I wanted to share something that was just occurring backstage. Was there's two things because people think okay, yeah, whatever, I've read in front of 1 million people or whatnot at the inauguration. I still get nervous as hell. Back there. And there's two things I do. This is only for us here, okay? No social media, and don't post this, but I say two things before when I'm backstage. One is I say the prayer of St. Francis, which I am I'm pretty much a secular guy, but this sort of grounds me, and I'll just read part of it. It says, "Grant that I may not so much seek to be consoled as to console, to be understood as to understand, to be loved as to love. For it is in the giving that we receive, it is in the pardoning that we are pardoned, and it is in dying to ourselves that we are born to eternal life." And I think that's, for me, sort of the part of the function of poetry. There's this idea that, as poets say, that when you finish a poem, it's no longer yours, and it comes back to you also in some interesting ways. And then there's the second part, which is a racier part. I also say, any RuPaul drag race fans out there? And then I say, Richard, and don't fuck it up. Which is okay. So anyway, you got to have the contrast to that. So, so here we go. I want to begin. Next slide, please. Yeah, great. Yeah. Next one. There you go. So I'm going to begin with a favorite poem, not from mine, but by Roque Dalton, who's a Salvadorian poet. And it captures for me my aesthetic in some ways and my self-view as a poet, because as a working class kid who never had access to poetry, I knew early on that I wanted to write poetry that was accessible. But also for me, and I try to tell this to my students, accessibility and complexity in my book aren't antonyms. In fact, I think some of the most successful poems are those kinds of poems that seem so simple, but if you really look at them, they're uncovering incredible complexity, but it's distilled, right? And I think, again, that's what poetry does at its best. So I strive all my life to write poems that will meet people wherever they are, whether that's a PhD poetry professor in Harvard or a bus driver. And this is a poem. I'll read it in the original Spanish first. Como tú amo el amor, la vida, el dulce encanto de las cosas, el paisaje celeste de los días de enero. También mi sangre bulle y río por los ojos que han conocido el brote de las lágrimas. Creo que el mundo es bello, que la poesía es como el pan de todos, y que mis venas no terminan en mí, sino en la sangre unánime de los que luchan por la vida, el amor, las cosas, el paisaje y el pan, la poesía de todos. Like you I love life, the sweet smell of things, the sky blue landscape of January days, and my blood boils up when I laugh through my eyes that have known the buds of tears. I believe the world is beautiful, and that poetry, like bread, is for everyone, and that my veins don't end in me, but in the unanimous blood of all those who struggle for life, for love, for little things, landscape, and bread, the poetry of everyone. Next slide. So, following the poultry theme of this morning, I know we were here. I was like, "Oh, this is going to be a good tie to Meg's welcome today." So, one of the things we could say, poetry finds. We could also say poultry finds the extraordinary in the ordinary. I'm sorry if you weren't here earlier; we were going to miss that joke. But so I want to take you back to the very first moment that I sort of got poetry. I'm a civil engineer. I didn't start writing till later in life, till like 27. So when I started writing really terrible poems, I started going back to some other things I knew from high school, right? The things that were kind of classics already in some ways in my mind. And one of them was, of course, The Red Wheelbarrow by William Carlos Williams. So I got the Norton Anthology of Modern Poetry, which was like this thick, and it was like a doorstop. And I'm like, what do I do with this? And I'm reading this poem in the Florida room, which is open to my kitchen in the house I grew up in. And I'm reading this poem, and then I'm watching my mother cook dinner. And so let me just read you the poem first. And of course, it's the most famous little poem in the world. So much depends upon a red wheelbarrow glazed with rainwater beside the white chickens. So in high school, you kind of go through that. You're like, okay, whatever. Yeah, cool. Yeah, it's a good poem. Like, whatever, Mrs. McNulty. I don't really whatever, chickens. Okay, I get it. So as I'm reading this poem, it suddenly took on a new light because I'm watching my mother, I said, cooking, and she's cooking in her same tomato-stained apron that seems to have been with me all my life, the same dull nicked knives, the same black cazuela full of grease and cutting onions and peppers and making dinner as she has practically all my life, even to this day. And I thought, so much depends upon my mother. with a stained glass apron. And it went on and on in my head, and I thought, this idea that poetry is really about finding the seemingly ordinary, the extraordinary in our seemingly ordinary moments of our life. And it really taught me a big lesson, and it's an adage that I still live by this day. Now, I didn't write that poem, but a few weeks later, I'm watching my mother at a little Cuban grocery store, a little Cuban bodega, and I'm kind of just like, she made me take her, and I'm like grumpy, and I don't like shopping. I'm like, like just helping her on an errand. And I'm in the corner sort of spying on her, and this poem came back to me, and I was like, okay, this is poetry. Mother picking produce. Oh, sorry. Next slide, please. So you can see my mom. This is one of my favorite pictures of my mom in Cuba and with her, with me at the inauguration in 2013. She scratches the oranges and smells the peel, presses an avocado just enough to judge its ripeness, polishes the Macintoshes, searching for bruises. She selects with hands that have thickened, fingers that have swollen with history around the white gold of a wedding ring she now wears as a widow. Unlike the archived photos of young, slender digits captive around black and white orange blossoms, her spotted hounds now reach into all the colors. I see all the folklore of her childhood, the fields, the fruit she once picked from the very tree, the wiry roots she pulled out of the very ground, and now, among collapsed boxes of yucca, through crumbling pyramids of golden mangoes, she moves with the same instinct and skill. This is how she survives death and her son, on those humble duties that will never change, on those habits of living which keep a life alive. She holds up the red grapes to ask me what I think, and what I think is this, a new poem about her. The grapes look like dusty rubies in her hands. But what I say is this: they look sweet, Mama. Very sweet. So this is a similar moment, and there's a little bit more backstory here, like, again, Richard Unplugged, things I usually don't say at readings. Next slide, please. This is a poem about my father. That's my father, my older brother, myself, and also the other member of the family, which is a plastic-covered sofa for any immigrant. It's part of the family. But so weird where poetry comes from, and I know there's a lot of poets in the room, right? You just never know when your subconscious is going to click with something. So I'm watching The Accidental Tourist, old movie, right? And William Hurt sort of is shaving in the mirror, and he just wipes the foam from his mouth. And I'm thinking about the extraordinary and the seemingly ordinary. How many times have I shaved in front of the mirror? And just thinking about my father and watching him shave and just caught my eyes in the mirror and caught his whole life in that moment. And this is the poem that ensued. Shaving. I'm not shaving. I'm writing about it. And I conjure the most elaborate idea on my beard as a creation of silent labor, like ocean steam rising to form clouds, or the bloom of spider webs each morning. The discreet mystery of how whiskers grow, like the drink roses take from the vase, or the fall of fresh rain becoming a river, and then rain again, so silently. I think of all these slow and silent forces, and how quietly my father's life passed me by. I think of those mornings when I am shaving and remember him in a masquerade of foam, then as if it was his beard I took the blade to. The memory of him in tiny snips of black whiskers swirling in the drain, dead pieces of myself from the face that never taught me how to shave. His legacy of whiskers that grow like black seeds sown over my cheek and chin, my own flesh. I'm not shaving, but I will tell you about the mornings with a full beard and the blade in my hand, when my eyes don't recognize themselves in a mirror echoed with 100 faces I have washed and shaved. It is in that split second, when perhaps the roses drink and the clouds form, when perhaps the spider spins and rain transforms, that I most understand the invisibility of life and the intensity of vanishing, like steam at the slick edges of the mirror without a single trace. Next slide. Thank you. So I think poets have said this in some way, shape, or form, the idea of the poem as a mirror. I'll add to that. In some ways, every personal poem, again, like I said, once, as poets say, once you finish a poem, it's no longer yours. But every personal poem is really a public poem in some ways, right? I mean, it begins in a very personal space, but as it grows, as you transcend the very thing that you came to the poem with, it becomes that gift in the world. And I always sort of, when I write a poem, I always know that that's the end game, so to speak, right? That it's once I let go of it, have processed something in myself, and that process is in the poem, and that's what readers connect with. To put it another way, I'm just thinking, I think also the poem itself is a mirror, right? We're all standing in front of the mirror of the poem. So am I, right? I'm looking back at my life. Every time I read one of these poems, I re-experience what that moment was like, and we share it together in some ways. And so there's this wonderful poem. I think there's many great poems that do this, but this is one by Mary Oliver that's called The Journey. And of course, it's a very personal journey, and I can get into craft things like the choice to use second person is very important in this poem, as my students know. Like, this is one of my things I tell them, first, second, or third person. But it's our journey as well, right? We're connecting with, as Robert Frost said, the universal is in the particular, and it's the irony of art that the more honest and forthright and transparent you are, the more universal you are. So this is all our journeys, and to this day also. I forget, there was a quote, someone that said a poem means something before you ever understand it. There's still parts of this poem that I don't understand, that just hit me in ways that, in some ways, I don't want to analyze, but here it is. One day, you finally knew what you had to do and began. Though the voices around you kept shouting their bad advice, though the whole house began to tremble, and you felt the old tug at your ankles. Mend my life, each voice cried. But you didn't stop. You knew what you had to do. Though the wind pried with its stiff fingers at the very foundations, though their melancholy was terrible. It was already late enough, and a wild night, and the road full of fallen branches and stones. But little by little, you left their voices behind. The stars began to burn through the sheets of clouds, and there was a new voice, which you slowly recognized as your own, that kept you company as you strode deeper and deeper into the world, determined to do the only thing you could do, determined to save the only life you could save. Next slide, please. So, I don't know, that image of the road with the stones falling on the branches, I just die in that moment. But that poem is also one of the things that's great about poems, that they're specific and also ambiguous at the same time. So we were talking about, I forget who was reading the Ars that's also sort of an Ars Poetica poem at another level, right? It's the idea of finding your own voice despite all the voices around you that are always trying to collude and mess your life up. But anyway, this is another one of sort of writers' taste life. This is my next favorite. This is one of my favorite quotes by Anais Nin, who is half Cuban. That writers taste life twice, and I think this is, I think all the arts in general, all the humanities, right? We go back in time and we do the job of going back through the fine details of our life to understand what they meant, to understand our present by understanding our past. And I think, again, that's also the gift that a poet gives, or I should say it's also the connection point, right? One of the greatest compliments that anybody can ever give me is when, after a reading, when they say, that poem reminded me of when I blank, blank, blank. There's something else that happens because they've seen my life tasted twice, and they go back and taste their life twice, right? And as writers, I think that's part of the reason that we're addicted to writing. So I'm going to read a couple of poems that sort of have to do with that. This first one actually keys into Lucinda's poem today about the house. And it's this favorite room in my house. And of course, my mother still lives in the same house that I grew up in. So every time I go visit her, among other things I won't mention, but a lot of chaos and confusion, there's a lot of great memories, but I also turn into a bratty 13-year-old, but that's another story, that's another poem. And my mother turns into my mother. And so how that goes. I say this because I was living with her for a while at 50, in my same room, sleeping in my, so anyway, I was sitting in the Florida room, which is a weird thing that I usually have to explain to anybody who's not from Florida. It's not quite an lanai, it's not quite a family, it's not quite a den. It's just this building. You just tack on something at the end of the house, and you call it a Florida room. And it's always surrounded by windows. So it's that room we all have in our life, right? And Lucinda's work today reminded me of that. We all have that room, whether it's in a house or somewhere, I don't know, anywhere. In aunt's house, that room where a lot of stuff happened, and you always go that room. And anyway, I was sitting there in my mom's old lazy boy by myself. She had gone on an errand, and I'm like, whoa, it just all hit me, and I went back and tasted that life again since childhood. So it's called El Florida room. Oh, next slide. So I'm going to show you some pictures of Florida. You got to dig that Herculon furniture, that Herculon sofa, and then the TV. Remember the TV back then? The TV was a member of the family. We had to take pictures with the TV because it was like a new baby. When you had one TV every 10 years, and then just so much you can imagine. Everything happened in this room. Nothing happened in the living room. El Florida room. Not a study or a den, but El Florida, as my mother called it. A pretty name for the room with the prettiest view of the lipstick red hibiscus puckering up against the windows, the tepid breeze laden with the brown sugar scent of loquats drifting in from the yard. Not a sunroom, but where the sun both rose and set. All day the shadows of banana trees fan dancing across the floor, and if it rained the loudest, like marbles plunking across the roof under constant threat of coconuts ready to fall from the sky. Not a sitting room, but at Florida, where I've sat alone for hours with butterflies frozen on the polyester curtains and faces of Yairo figurines and sad angels, clowns and princes with their eyes glazed blue and gray, gazing from behind the glass doors of the wall cabinet. Not a TV room, but where I watched Creature Feature as a boy, clinging to my brother, safe from vampires, in the same sofa where I fell in love with Clint Eastwood and my abuelo, watching westerns or pitying women crying in telenovelas with my abuela. Not a family room, but the room where my father twirled his hair while listening to 8 tracks of Elvis and read Nietzsche and Kant a few days before he died. Where my mother learned to dance salsa as she swept, and I learned to dance pressed against my tia Julia's enormous breasts. At the edge of the city, in the company of crickets, beside the empty clothesline, telephone wires, and the moon, tonight, my life is an old friend sitting with me, not in the living room, but in the light of El Florida, as quiet and necessary as any of the billion stars shining above it. And then, so another tasting life twice. This is the Gulf Motel. Place out of my childhood, since I was like 7 into my 20s, actually. This place in Marco Island, which is on the west coast of Florida, poor man's vacation, basically almost a staycation. When I moved back to Miami the first time, I, of course, like we all do, try to take all those trips down memory lane, and I went to Marco Island looking for the Gulf Motel, and I couldn't find it. Obviously, like most of Florida, it changes every 5 minutes, completely overdeveloped. And my husband, Mark, was with me, and I started cussing like a sailor. I was like, and he's like, "You sound just like your mother." I'm like, which is like the wrong thing to say in any circumstance, but I did catch myself understanding that I was speaking about Marco Island in the same way that my parents would talk about Cuba, in the sense of that loss of place is a fundamental human experience. And so this poem speaks to the adage of you can't go back home, so to speak, but it also speaks to, again, poetry is really interesting because poetry is contradictory at times. It speaks contradictory truths. But you can go back in some ways because those memories are always cherished. And yet, if they're not gone, like the old adage says, you don't know what you got till you lose it. And so this is part of that poem as well. And anyway, for those writers in the room, I went back and wrote this poem that was absolutely horrible. It was like just angry and like spitting stuff out. And my husband said, "That's the worst poem you've ever written in your life." And so I was like, "No, it's not. It says exactly what I wanted to say." And so, in the essence, I realized as I left my mouth that that's not what poetry is about, right? As they say, show, don't tell. And I was just telling, but not showing. So I kept one line in here, which is the refrain, and rewrote that poem, and just went back to relive the memory and see what the memory would reveal for me, to live life twice, and really understanding the essence of that. So it's called Looking for the Gulf Motel. Looking for the Gulf Motel, Marco Island, Florida. There should be nothing here I don't remember. The Gulf Motel with murmured lampposts and ship's wheel in the lobby should still be rising out of the sand like a cake decoration. My brother and I should still be pretending we don't know our parents, embarrassing us as they roll the luggage cart past the front desk, loaded with our scruffy suitcases, 24 loaves of Cuban bread, brown bags bulging with enough mangoes to last the entire week, our espresso pot, the pressure cooker, and a pork roast reeking garlic through the lobby. All because we can't afford to eat out, mijo. Not even on vacation. Only 2 hours from my home in Miami, but far enough away to be thrilled by the wider sands on the west coast of Florida, where I should still be, for the first time, watching the sun set instead of rise over the ocean. There should be nothing here I don't remember. My mother should still be in the kitchenette of the Gulf Motel, her daisy sandals from Kmart still squeaking across the linoleum, still gorgeous in her teal swimsuit and amber earrings, stirring a pot of arroz con pollo, adding sprinkles of onion powder and dollops of tomato sauce. My father should still be in a terry cloth jacket, smoking, clinking a glass of amber whiskey in the sunset at the Golf Motel, watching us dive into the pool, 2 sons he'll never see grow into men, who will be proud of him. There should be nothing here I don't remember. My brother and I should still be playing parcheesi. My father should still be alive, slow dancing with my mother on the sliding glass balcony of the Golf Motel. No music, only the waves keeping time. A song only their minds hear, 10,000 nights back to their life in Cuba. My mother's face should still be resting against his bare chest, like the moon resting on the sea. And the stars should still be turning around them. There should be nothing here I don't remember. My brother should still be 13, sneaking rum in the bathroom and sculpting naked women from sand. And I should still be 8 years old, dazzled by seashells and how many seconds I can hold my breath underwater. But I'm not. I'm 38, driving up Collier Boulevard, looking for the Golf Motel, for everything that should still be, but isn't. I want to blame the condos, their shadows for ruining the beach in my past. I want to chase the snowbirds away with their tacky mansions and yachts. I want to turn the golf courses back into mangroves. I want to find the Golf Motel exactly as it was and pretend for a moment nothing lost is ever lost. Thank you. Thanks. So that poem also has, again, like a mirror effect, because everybody has that place, right? That one place. So I hadn't planned on reading this one, and I'm not sure, but I think it fits into something else about poetry, which is, I always say, like, oh, when a poem's done, but for the writers in the room, of course, we know a poem's never done, right? You just give up on them, so to speak. And so I don't know, I just want to read this poem because I think it's important for us as writers and us as listeners and readers of poetry that poetry is really not about resolution, right? It's really about contemplation, right? It's really not about finding that some final answer to everything. That's the stuff of politicians, and they don't get there anywhere either. But so this is a poem about just, I'm just going to say that because I don't read this one often, but it's called Since and Finished. And in a way, it's an ars poetica, like was shared this afternoon. I've been writing this since the summer my grandfather taught me how to hold a blade of grass between my thumbs and make it whistle. Since I first learned to make green from blue and yellow, turned paper into snowflakes, believed a seashell echoed the sea, and the sea had no end. I've been writing this since a sparrow flew into my class and crashed into the window, laid to rest on a bed of tissue in a shoebox by the swings. Since the morning I first stood up on the bathroom sink to watch my father shave. Since our eyes met in that foggy mirror. Since the splinter my mother pulled from my thumb and kissed my blood. I've been writing this since the woman I slept with the night of my father's wake. Since my grandmother first called me a faggot and I said nothing. Since I forgave her and my body pressed hard against Michael on the dance floor at Twist. Since the years spent with a martini and men I knew I couldn't love. I've been writing this since the night I pulled off the road at Big Sur and my eyes caught the insanity of the stars. Since the months by the kitchen window watching the snow come down like a fallout from a despair I had no word for. Since I stopped searching for a name and found myself tick-tock in a hammock, asking nothing of the sky. I've been writing this since spring, studying the tiny leaves on the oaks dithering like moths, a contrast to the eon-old fieldstones unveiled of snow, but forever works in progress. Since tonight, with the battled moon behind the branches spying on the world, same as it ever was, perfectly unfinished. My glasses and pen at rest on the night table. I've been writing this since my eyes started seeing less, my knees aching more. Since I began picking up twigs, feathers, and pretty rocks for no reason, collecting on the porch where I sit to read and watch the sunset, like my grandfather did every day, remembering him and how to make a blade of grass whistle. So, thanks. Next slide, please. So the idea of emotional complexities, and those have been my students hear me say this all and over again, but often I enter a poem thinking, well, like the Gulf Motel poem, right? I know exactly what I feel about something, but in the process of the art, you realize that you might feel something completely contradictory, or again, the ambiguity of realizing that both emotions are true. Next slide, please. And one of the, sorry, that's, yeah. That's Elizabeth Bitch. There she is. Hi, girl. She's one of my greatest influences. But this particular poem, which many of you are probably familiar with, I think is particularly brilliant for that. It argues both sides of the coin. What it's saying is that loss, right, is one of the most devastating human experiences, right? And yet what we do best, right? That we triumph, we survive, we're resilient. I always think, how do the parents of Sandy Hook get up the next morning? And yet they do, and they find a purpose to that tragedy. So it's saying both, it's like you lose, but losing is part of the condition and part of what makes us human. I often read this poem at eulogies in some ways, that knowing that we lose, but we also, nothing's ever lost in some ways. But anyway, it's one art, and it's a villanelle, and if it wasn't good enough as a poem, it's also this incredible form that is one of the hardest things to write in the world, that repeats certain lines, and it's written in iambic pentameter, et cetera, et cetera. One art. The art of losing isn't hard to master. So many things seem filled with the intent to be lost that their loss is no disaster. Lose something every day. Accept the fluster of lost door keys, the hour badly spent. The art of losing isn't hard to master. Then practice losing farther, losing faster, places and names and where it was you meant to travel. None of these will bring disaster. I lost my mother's watch, and look, my last or next to last of 3 loved houses went. The art of losing isn't hard to master. I lost 2 cities, lovely ones and vaster. Some realms I owned, 2 rivers, a continent. I missed them, but it wasn't a disaster. Even losing you, the joking voice, a gesture I love, I shan't have lied. It's evident the art of losing's not too hard to master, though it may look like, write it like disaster. Next slide, please. So there's a project that I was involved with poet Spencer Reese. It's an all-girls orphanage. Orphanage is still sort of the term back there. There's orphanages, especially for girls that are completely abandoned in Honduras, in San Pedro Sula. And the idea was to teach them poetry as a way of teaching them English, but also as a way of a kind of a public humanities in some ways, getting poetry to sort of process whatever they may have need to process. And the stories are amazing. So we put an anthology together. He spent a year there. I spent a few weeks. And next slide, please. And this is Aylin, one of the girls that I ended up sponsoring, and Spitfire. Knew English pretty well, but also was just like interviewing me since the minute I got there. And so I want to share a poem with her, and then I'll share one more, and we'll close. Just because I think you'll be surprised again about emotional complexities where she goes in this poem. And you would think that someone who's experienced something like this, and her story is really, really traumatic, would stay in that space. And I think poetry, again, that's why I'm addicted to writing poetry, is like the spaces it brings you to beyond the expected. It's called Counting. At the time, she was 15 years old. Every week, every day, every hour, every minute, and every second that I pass without my family, it feels like a knife trying to get inside a rock. I am the knife, and the rock is my life. So this is me, Aylin, and this is my difficult life without my family. Some people think that living in a home for girls like our little Roses is a big blessing. Yes, I say to those people, it is a great blessing, but at the same time, it is a curse. Every night, I start thinking and talking to God in my prayers. Why, God? Why did my family leave me alone? There is no answer. A lot of people see me and my sisters and my aunt, who is not really my aunt, and they think we are a happy group, but really all of us think the same thing that no one says. One day, will our mother come to visit us? It is ugly to know that everyone in this school is celebrating Mother's Day. And this day, I feel ashamed to be me. But, God, listen to this. I'm counting time like people count the stars, and I will keep counting until my mother comes. My sisters are graduating, and soon I will go to college too. When I graduate from college and when I'm finally somebody in this world, God, I will go straight to Mexico where my mother lives, and I will stare at her like I stare at the stars, and with a voice that cracks like thunder, I will say, I forgive you. But for now, God, I am here in our little Roses, counting stars. Right, sorry. Glad to report, she went on to law school, so good story. It's, by the way, Little Roses is the name of the place if you ever want to look it up and support them. They're an amazing organization, or it's not only an organization, but an institution. So I'm going to end with a new poem from a book that's forthcoming in October. It's called Homeland of My Body. And obviously home, identity, belonging are things that obsess all my work. But in this new book, again, poetry is always a constant exploration. There's no final answer to the word home, right? And I think partly it had to do with the pandemic, where things got really quiet and I started looking at small things. I think it also had to do with, now that I'm almost 40, thinking about my own, I won't say mortality. It's that, but not like, not in that really heavy way, but you start thinking about what's life, and how long will you be here for? And thinking about home now in a different way. Home has always seemed to me something exterior when I realized that I have never gained or lost a home, but that it always exists in my body. And by that, I don't mean just my physiology, but my memories. Everything is experienced through the senses. So it's all in there. It's all in your body's memory. So I'll say that. I can't say anything about this poem so much because they're so brand new that I always say my poems are smarter than me, and it takes me a while for them to teach me back what I wrote, because I'm like, I have no idea. Like, I just write this stuff, which is also why I'm addicted to poetry. I'm like, oh yeah, like, wow, I never realized that. But I think it has some of that in there. But I'll just leave you with that, and sort of like, watch out for the book. That's also my plug. How about that? My publisher makes me do that now. But anyway, it's called Self to Self. Obviously a conversation with some part of me that I'm not sure who it is yet. It might be this little kid. What have you yearned for all your life, Richard? You, who's aged in me. Do we know enough now to know that our answer isn't happiness? Not the sweet petals of some flower we've imagined should forever scent our heart. Not the nomad clouds we've tried to hold still in our eyes long enough to see our soul eternity at home in them across a homeless sky. Not the face of the moon, a mime whose gestures of shadow and light have entertained our desire for immortal glory. Not the persistence of waves we've wanted to believe are as fated and willed as we've wished to be. Oh, Richard, have I been asking you the wrong question? Maybe it is not what we've yearned for, but what we've always lived on. Isn't our answer the joy of all the temporal moments that grace us? A bud just before it blooms or leans into its wilt. A cloud just before it sighed from a wave's wisps and drifts into the destiny of wind. The dark moon free of our eyes just before it ascends into the slavery of its sunlit cycles. Tides just before the purpose of ebb and flow. And Richard, just before we are Richard, just before the greed of our ego rises, needing to shine before we slip into yet another day. Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Thanks.
Whoa. Now you know why you came. This whole day has been an extraordinary one, and Richard, you've just given us such a deep blessing. Provocative, inspiring, funny, wise, and just so true. So true. One of my neighbors came to me the other day, and she said, you know, Mark, I finally know what poets are. I said, well, what would that be, Rhonda? She said, poets are the most human ones. And I said, well, that's very flattering. Why do you mean that? She said, because I mean that. And that was enough of an answer. But you've given us a sense of what it is to be human, to be authentically who you are, which touches who each one of us is. And it's that touching that graces this day and graces this life. Thank you. So, friends, the party isn't quite over. If you'd like to stay for a reception in the room that you came through at the very beginning, the Mayflower Room, you'll have a chance to meet Richard. There are still books that Allison Warden, sorry? Yes, the raffle, I'm getting to that. Allison Warden of the Arctic Turn has been selling books here. Is Allison here? She's probably in the next room. So you might want to stop and greet Allison, one of the best bookstores in Maine. And if you came in and you got a little red raffle ticket, we're going to do the raffle at the reception, but you have to be there to get your prize. So if you have to leave, then give your ticket to somebody who will give you the prize. Right. So let's thank once again the poets, the songwriters, the whole shebang. And as you go, somebody said to me, Mark, it's really audacious to call this the first annual. Anything, right? The first annual. Call it the inaugural. I said, no, this is the first annual because there will be a second annual next year. So come back on May 18th for not the same thing, but something just as good. Thank you so much for coming. Stay for the reception. Meet Richard. Meet your friends. Celebrate poetry. Thank you so much.